Modern. We're prepping for a voyage.
Modern.
The force of an old-fashioned equals whiskey mass times bitters acceleration.
Why don't you make that a double?
Modern bar cart.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 1 of the Modern Bar Cart podcast. In this episode, I sit down for a chat with a couple of my favorite cocktail personalities, Alex Luboff and Jordan Wicker of the Speaking Easy podcast. I was actually a guest on their show back in August of 2016, and they've been producing consistently great audio content about cocktails and home bartending for over a year and a half now. Since this is episode 1, we discuss the joy of being a home bartender, as well as some of the trials, tribulations, comedic mistakes, and life hacks that will help you decide if building your own home bar or bar cart is a project you're interested in undertaking. Some of the things we discuss include how Jordan and Alex got into cocktail podcasting, the values of a good home bartender, Alex's duck bar, common cocktail rookie mistakes, the zone of proximal drinking, must-read cocktail books, where to grab a drink with George Washington, and much, much more. These fellas are a real pleasure to listen to, and you can find all of the various ways to listen to and connect with them at the end of the episode and, of course, in the show notes. Finally, despite not being a part of the recorded dialogue, I want to give a huge shout out to the Speaking Easy podcast's fantastic producer, Silent Tyler, without whom this would not have been possible. So, make yourself a drink, and if you're not in a place to do that, make yourself a mental drink and enjoy this awesome kickoff episode with the gents from the Speaking Easy podcast. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Modern Bar Cart podcast. My name is Eric Kozlik, and I am sitting here today with two of my podcasting idols, dare I say, Jordan Wicker and Alex Luboff of the Speaking Easy podcast. Gentlemen, thanks for being on the show.
It's good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, and thank you for obviously setting the expectations very low, so that we don't have to be funny or anything like that.
I'm a sucker for flattery, so keep going.
I didn't say you had to be funny. You were just sort of, it was your run-of-the-mill flattery.
Yep, no, I'm a fan.
Keep it general. Yeah, and it always lands.
Nice.
So, do you mind just briefly introducing yourselves and what you do, and just so our listeners can get a flavor?
Sure.
So you go for yourself, I'll go for myself, and then we'll talk about the podcast.
Okay, cool. So I'm Alex. I guess you need to identify the voices, right? Yeah. So I'm a guy who works here in DC, living it up. I don't know. No, I got interested in this podcast just through kind of meeting Jordan. We kind of met you through mutual friends, and eventually just kind of started talking about drinks, and it's gone pretty well so far. So
yeah, so I generally introduce myself when people learn about the podcast as the guy who has a very interesting family, and I'm the guy who had to be the suit. And so my day job is being a suit, but I got a strong interest in liquor, and that's a weird way to say that, but a strong interest in liquor and mixed drinks and cocktails, really starting in my time in Chicago during law school. And part of that was my learning experience through family members who are in the restaurant and liquor business. And so when I moved out to DC, I was throwing cocktail parties, and Alex was throwing cocktail parties, and we learned that we were each throwing cocktail parties through a mutual friend. So we started inviting each other. And when that happened, we could throw bigger ones because we could each be behind the bar. And
pool the resources, right?
Pool the resources. We could one guy could be playing front of the house, the other guy could be back of the house, and we could get more done that way.
And it was kind of interesting because we just would have conversations, and people would kind of pay attention and just listen to us go back and forth. And so from there, somebody said you guys should start a blog, and we were like, oh, blog, like
we hate a blog. I don't.
Even though we still have one.
I'm not literate really, so
only like 75%. So, but yeah, and then we were kind of like, oh well, a podcast might be something to do. So yeah, it's been about a year and a half, and I think what we enjoy most about it, and I am going to speak on Jordan's behalf here, as I normally love to. That I think the part we've really enjoyed the most is just interacting with people. They tell us their ideas for what they want to hear about, what they're drinking, their spins on classics versus our spins on classics, that sort of stuff. And so it's been kind of that's been, I think, the part that we've really enjoyed the most, just about doing it, and it's going pretty well.
Nice.
Yeah, no, definitely engaging the interested group of the cocktail community at large. And obviously that's a big thing without social media, the community would be much smaller. And through doing the podcast, I'm not much of a social media person on the personal level, but through doing social media through the podcast, we've expanded our community to a national, international level. We have people who interact with us on a regular basis.
We're huge in Brazil or Argentina. Or one of those places.
I just heard Argentina. You guys were talking in one of your more recent episodes about that.
Which is always surprising to us because we are a couple of Midwestern boys that mispronounce everything. Yeah. So I guess I don't know. I think that for me that's the driving factor behind the podcast. Is I wouldn't do this other than the fact that I do believe strongly that cocktails should be approachable and common and homemade.
Yeah.
And as much as we want to talk about the craft cocktail movement, which I love as a consumer, the homemade cocktail is one that I think should be a more prevalent experience.
Sure. Yeah, that's I really like listening to your episodes because you get a lot of the DIY aspect out of it, and that's, to me, that's my favorite part, because you guys, through doing the research for your episodes, you've kind of given yourself this constraint, which is, hey, we're going to post an episode every week, which kind of forces you to be creative. Mm-hmm. And as a listener, I sort of get that creativity secondhand, and I don't have to do it myself. But every once in a while, I'll be like, oh, man, I need to make something. Oh yeah, Alex has that bomb brandied cherries recipe on the Speaking Easy podcast, and I can just go and basically I go to your place and I get this canned creativity. And I always give trivia. I always say like, oh man, I got this great recipe off this podcast, and try and send you guys some listeners. But the nice thing is I get to participate in that creativity because you guys have kind of committed to it. So that's what I appreciate about the podcast. But what if you had to basically make a pitch to somebody off the street who's curious about your podcast, what value would you like? How would you pitch it to them?
I guess I always kind of tell people that we've never been professionals. I don't think either of us really seek to be professionals. It's kind of, our passion is the hobby itself. And, I don't think, at least I wouldn't say that I've ever created the best version of a drink. I create one that, my family and friends enjoy. And I've introduced people to gin that they never thought they'd drink gin. And I was just talking to someone the other day, and they said, getting someone to try something. Like, for instance, I have a problem with sour beers, right? But I went to an event just last night, and I tried 5 different sour beers from this one company. And
which company?
It was Upland Brewing.
Okay.
They were having their DC launch here, and I figured I'd try them because they're a company from Indiana, and that's where Jordan and I both went to school, and I actually enjoyed some of them. I don't like all sours, but I enjoyed some of them. And it was kind of this idea of like, you try 5 drinks, you try 5 gins, you try 5, just getting out there and trying it. And you don't need special skills. You don't need, to make a huge investment. I was getting the sample sizes of these sour beers, for instance. You get out there, you try it, you'll find something you really connect with, whether that's on a taste level or, it kind of reminds you of, I had a cocktail that once reminded me of like cereal milk, whatever. It's kind of like, almost like the milk bar thing, but but in a cocktail form. And it's that sort of stuff that I think is really, we just want people to connect with that idea that you don't need a lot of special skills to really enjoy drinks. And there's this great history of hobby bartending that I think is really what we're interested in.
You don't need to be an alchemist to make a good drink, and there's plenty out there that's traditional and easy and approachable. And I'm going to go back to approachable. That's again the reason that I want this podcast. I enjoy this podcast. I take the time to do research and drinking for this podcast.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's the thing I think that keeps me going. The thing that I mentioned early in some of our shows though too is I grew up in a family where there was a lot of moments that I'd call nostalgic food moments. Things that you think back to your childhood and they are immediately associated with not just a moment or a time or people, but with the food that was served then. Mm-hmm. And granted, when you're a kid, you're not drinking cocktails. But I do think that on a personal level, I have grown to appreciate the culture of drinking, especially in family and informal settings, in a way that, done appropriately, you should have the same nostalgic moments where you can remember having a great old fashioned on the patio with your brothers-in-law, or you can remember having a Negroni after work with a couple of your good friends, or the same way that you could remember sitting on the back porch drinking a beer. You should be able to have those same kind of nostalgic moments with a cocktail.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. So basically, Alex, you're talking about sort of the DIY ethos.
Yeah.
You know, do it yourself. You don't need to have a degree from the Culinary Institute of America to be able to taste orange or something like that. I think most of us have had that flavor, familiar with it. You can probably pick it out of a cocktail.
Yeah.
And Jordan, I love the point that you made about the memory aspect and the emotion aspect. I think we talked about this. I've been a guest on your podcast once, which was really fun, and we talked a little bit about that. And I actually, as you were talking, I was recalling my sister's fiance, and she were able to meet up with me in New Orleans last year when I was down there, and I actually got to give them their first Negroni, and that was like a crazy moment because as I think back on it, I've gotten texts and social media posts where they tag me or they send the pictures to me. They're like, "Yeah, I just got this new gin. I'm trying it out," and it's cool to think back to the seed of that joy being the moment where I said, "Hey, have you ever had a Negroni?"
Yeah.
No? Well, we're gonna have a Negroni.
So that's actually a great point because the nostalgic piece, the memory piece, the cultural piece of it for me is, again, the reason that I that's the reason I was interested before the podcast and the reason I'm interested in doing the podcast. But I can't say that anything other than my proudest moments having done the podcast are when people come and talk to me and they tell me I've changed their drinking habits. That they've added this to their list of favorite drinks, or they do this differently, or people telling me that they now have a new favorite cocktail is just like the highlight of this experience. But even if it's something less than that, it's, hey, I really like the fact that you guys go through different liquors or whatever and explain why one is better for a cocktail or another. And now I put citrus in my vodka. I got that compliment recently, and I was like, that is like probably the bare minimum for that to be a compliment. But that seems like one of those huge marginal steps towards drinking better.
It's like someone saying I stopped beating my dog.
Thank you. But continue.
Right.
He likes me now.
I mean, that's kind of what I was talking about. To make someone the first gin drink that they enjoy, and they don't say, "Oh, this tastes like pine needles." Well, that's a very limited scope, and especially when it comes to gin, I'm of the belief that gin is probably more varied than I would say than whiskey in a lot of ways. There are ways that you can vary gin to challenge it, and I'm certain Jordan would Jordan push back. I had to get into that, but
I hesitate on that statement on the variety, but I do think that it is more versatile in a cocktail.
Yeah. Well, so maybe that's
whiskey.
my point.
Sure.
And I do think that that's one thing where gin was my first alcohol or liquor of choice. In college, it's really easy and approachable to order a gin and tonic.
Yes.
You know what you're going to get out of that.
But then to make
even a lousy gin and tonic is still going to be a gin and tonic.
But then my point is to then make someone one that's like, wow,
right?
To use a tonic syrup or to use something that they're really like, wow.
Well, to elevate that to a point where even just consistency is an okay thing.
And I think that's kind of the last element, actually, of our show is to just elevate it to just a little bit of a different level. I mean, you're talking about even stepping your sugar from just pure white refined sugar to getting a more unrefined turbinado or Domero or something like that.
Yeah,
like that's the sort of stuff that I think that as a drinker and as a hobbyist bartender and then as a host, that's the sort of stuff that people are like, wow, this old fashioned's so good, and I'm like, I'm just using a less processed sugar. Like that's the only difference from what you had last week. So
I think I'd even simplify that further and say that just about everyone can make a better mixed drink and or cocktail than the vast majority of mixed drinks or cocktails that you're gonna get at most bars.
Sure.
I'm gonna separate out a cocktail bar from that. Somebody who sets themselves out as caring about cocktails and cocktail culture and that sort of thing. Obviously, those professionals do a fantastic job. But if you go to a sports bar and you order an old fashioned,
mistake.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
With soda water,
like you're gonna be disappointed. It's like knowing the favorite thing your mom makes and then going and ordering that at a restaurant. You're always going to be disappointed. And again, going back to that kind of homemade mentality, you can make stuff at home that beats the $10 or $12 drink you're gonna buy at a lot of restaurants or maybe not a lot of restaurants, but a lot of bars, and end up paying that tab for with the same product with very little work. And you can do it at home, and you can have your own guests, and you can host the experience. And some people don't want to be hosts, and I get that, but that's also another piece of all of this that although some people will notice that occasionally if I'm running late I get a little on tight, I still like the process of hosting.
Yeah, that happens as type A people being hosts. It's a blessing and a curse because they have all their shit together, but then if something kind of goes sideways, it's a little stressful. But one of the things that I wanted to highlight from what you guys are saying is I want to throw a term at you, and you might be able to coin this down the road. But I took some developmental psychology classes way back in undergrad, and I remember there's this concept called a zone of proximal development.
Zone of proximal development.
ZPD, baby. And it was this area that was in between easy and hard. And it was where when they gave kids tasks that they needed to learn, if it was not super easy, but it was not so hard that they couldn't do it, just completely out of their reach, that they ended up growing and learning best and most quickly. And so I think based on what you're saying about like how your podcast tries to be accessible, so not pretentious, it's not way up over people's heads, but at the same time you are trying to elevate it just a little bit. So what I think you guys really have done is you've built the zone of proximal drinking.
T-shirt idea. Silent Tyler's our producers.
I like
us,
that a lot.
He's gonna make that T-shirt tonight.
Yeah, he's got a great T-shirt on right now.
Yeah,
he does.
Wow, the zone of proximal. And that's really it. Like I think that's something that we did kind of set out to do it. I think one of the inspirations for me to get involved in this podcast. I mean, there are really two reasons. One, I got into just liquor in general beyond just, hey, let's do a shot. I got into liquor in general because I had an ex-girlfriend who was like, my brothers drink whiskey, so you're gonna learn to drink whiskey. And I said, okay. And I kind of went from there, I guess. But I think then the real inspiration to do this podcast, beyond just the love of spirits and all that, was when I saw this video from a bartender who was making this drink, and he was using green chartreuse, which the irony is that we have an episode on chartreuse, but he was just talking about, you just throw that in there, just a little bit and whatever. And he's talking about a $60 bottle of chartreuse, which you may not use that much. And granted, we then had to do our own exploration and kind of get to the point where we're like, oh, you can get a lot more out of chartreuse, and it is worth making the investment,
right?
On down the road in your development. So it's kind of this interesting idea that like it's not the first step. Like if you're kind of not ready to go beyond beer and beyond shots or whatever, then this definitely isn't the thing for you. But yeah, that kind of idea, the zone of proximal drinking, I kind of see that as, we don't have that special training, and Jordan and I, frankly, aren't even all that smart. I am speaking for you again.
Yeah, all right.
But we'll let people tune into the Speaking Easy podcast and make their own decision about that.
Okay, but the thing is that I think that we have this kind of passion for this, and I've got kind of an experimental streak when it comes to drinks. Jordan's more the traditionalist, kind of tweaking the classics. We have kind of our set paths, and we are able to explore, and we make a good team because of that.
Right, you have a really nice back and forth in that respect.
And I think that's part of it, and it is built on respect. But I think that it also kind of stems well, some kind of respect.
All right,
maybe not self-respect.
Not totally. But I think that is it. That again, going back to that do-it-yourself attitude, the kind of that ethos, and allowing people, showing people that when they come to a party of mine, they say, "Wow, this is a really great old fashioned." I'm like, you guys, you're 3 steps away from making a great old fashioned. You just may have never had one that was made quite in the simple, straightforward way that we make them. So
nice.
I think it was kind of the idea.
Yeah.
It all.
Yeah. So kind of taking what we've just been talking about and transitioning, what do you think are the great joys of home bartending? So we've talked about what you do on the podcast and the knowledge that you try to bring to people, but you can feel free to speak, I guess, personally at this point, because I know that, Jordan, you mentioned earlier that hosting is being a good host is part of what the podcast does, and I know that you reference that a lot, and you both talk about some of the parties that you've thrown. So whether that's for yourself or for a group of people, maybe you can make distinctions there. I'm sure that they're very different, but what are the joys of home bartending? If you had to, again, this is kind of, this being one of our very first episodes, this is kind of like a pitch to those people who might be looking to transition from shots and beers, who might have had a good mixed drink in a bar and are maybe a little bit curious but not totally convinced.
So I think for me it comes down to just how I grew up. My parents are both really good hosts. My dad's more the front of house kind of guy, making jokes and all that sort of stuff. And then my mom, cooked up a storm and make sure everyone's had their glass was filled and everything. And to me, what they taught me about hosting was that it is kind of the ultimate form of respect. It's the attention paid is not out of, you're not trying to get anything out of it. It's really one of the selfless things that you can do for your friends is just to have a well organized, kind of well run get together. And I always kind of saw that as just something that you could do to really show affection to people that isn't just buying them things, although you certainly should supply your own parties.
You're not charging a cover for
but although I did have a party recently, I had a cover. It was a fundraiser for my new bar, but that's different, entirely different. It was a charitable cause, but it's that idea that
everybody who donated is going to get their money back.
It's more of like a deposit, right?
It's a timeshare, no, but it's that idea that you do this because this is a form of affection. And I always thought that was really great. And that's, maybe that's a little too Midwestern for some people, but I think it for me, it's something that I just really enjoy doing. And
so I will double down on that note. I grew up in a family who valued good hosting, good hospitality. I will tongue-in-cheek say that I also grew up in a family that had PBS and the Spanish-speaking channel. So I watched at a very young age a show on PBS called Keeping Up Appearances. It was a BBC show.
The Rosemary Bouquet.
Yes. Wow, that's a childhood reference that I didn't think anybody would catch. But
Yeah, my grandmother had that channel, and she lived right next door. So,
but I when I want to give my mom a hard time about the expectations, the ritual cleaning before things, that sort of thing, like that's the show that I reference. And but then even beyond that, when I was living in Chicago at the same time as my brother-in-law and older sister, and again they're both in the restaurant business now, and they've been in the hospitality business before. And to be honest, 3 years in Chicago, spending a ton of money on education, and I think some of the best lessons I got were the lessons about hospitality and hosting, and again, part of that was also the culture of drinking and drinking better. So for me, a big part of it is the hosting. I've mentioned that for me, hosting does become stressful. That's also something that I think I picked up from family. Again, I try to set high expectations. One thing that I'd say though is, like, we started this podcast because we were both throwing cocktail parties, and if I look back at a year and a half ago at the cocktail party I was throwing, I'd be embarrassed to throw that one today. And not to say that that was a bad cocktail party. It's just that because I've taken the time to learn and to get better and to practice, the experience, I hope, for my guests is significantly better now than it was then. And again, I don't think that anybody would have criticized me for the parties I threw before, but I know that I take extra steps and I take extra care, and I've made it so that things are consistent. And I think about the number of serves. I think about the cocktail for the not the customer, but the friend and
consumer.
And again, I used to worry a ton when I first started about, like, I have a decent amount of liquor available, and I have a decent number of mixers available, so I should just let people kind of choose what they want to drink. And a very early lesson I had in having the podcast was that's a terrible idea. One, the unlimited choice is something that makes people hesitate to suggest something outside of something that they know is easy and comfortable, and they know that they like. And so, I mean, we had an early show where we talked about making cocktail menus for your parties, and I kind of, to be honest, I think I remember kind of scoffing at that idea as just something extra. But really what it does is, one, it allows you to practice the things that you're working on currently. It allows you to bring in like staples in your repertoire, and it also limits choices in a way that is comfortable to your guest.
Which then allows you as the host to enjoy the party more.
Right.
Because that's ultimately why you have a party. It's not to have people in your apartment to drink your booze. It's to have people in your apartment to enjoy their company.
Yeah.
Right.
And it also limits the amount of time you're spending behind the bar trying to figure out what to make for somebody. And for me, again, if it's about the hosting, it's not being a good bartender means that you're also a good host, I think, on the professional level. But on the home side, if you're spending your entire time behind the bar, you're definitely not being a good host.
Right.
And
for somebody who likes to be in control and have things organized, what happens when somebody throws in the X factor? I remember you guys talking about, somebody brings someone who's not into cocktails, and then you have to play 50 questions. And that's totally valid point.
That's like when I had someone bring a guest I didn't really know, and that was fine to bring a guest. But he said he wanted a sweet vodka drink and he doesn't want to taste the alcohol. And I was like, okay, where's my apple juice? How do you even get to that? And it's part of the adjustment you make. And as you're more experienced, I think it gets a little bit easier. But that was hard. Yeah.
Again, I've in the last few months, even I started doing it earlier than that, but in the last few months I've gotten, I think, a lot better at varying my cocktail menu, so that if somebody comes in who I'm not familiar with, who has drinking habits that I don't normally cater to in terms of their liquor of choice or the style of drink, that I feel like I have something that at least they should try. on the menu. And so again, I'm limited to 4 drinks, 5 drinks maybe at the most. And they're things that I generally can prepare ahead of time to 1 or 2 steps. So, I mean, I've even gotten and Alex will probably give me a hard time for this. Like, I make an old fashioned syrup now. So I've got the sugar and the bitters all combined as one. You give me 2 ounces of liquor and I can give you an old fashioned in 5 seconds. I just threw a derby party this weekend, and I went ahead and made mint simple syrup,
which was great, I will say.
And people hung around longer than I expected because they were like, well, we're going to go to the bar and we're going to get a sugary mess there. We might as well drink all of the whiskey he has here with the mint simple syrup, because they like the flavor more. I will say that some people kind of scoff at I blend. When I make my mint simple syrup, I just take simple syrup and add a couple handfuls of mint leaves. So I've plucked the stems and everything off, but I just throw that in the blender and blend the shit out of it. And
it was good.
And
if you're doing that day of, that's a great solution.
Day of, and then you don't have to do anything else other than, again, it's depending on who you're serving, 1.5 ounces or 2 ounces of whiskey and a 1/4 ounce of the syrup, and you're done. And again, if you're only serving 4 people, it's probably worth the time to do the extra muddle in the glass and give them the whole show. If you're serving 15 people want to drink faster than that. And if people are patient, 15 people aren't going to have their drinks until you're 30 minutes in anyway. Again, those little lessons about being a host, again, go into it. And then again, introducing people to new drinks. I think the menus allow you to do that more. And also, if people aren't comfortable with what's on the menu, again, at this point, I'm pretty comfortable with what I have around the house on a regular basis to whip up something. And it's probably not going to hit the mark. I used to put a ton of pressure on myself to give them the best drink they ever had. And then I remembered that I wasn't a professional. And I was like, I can give them a direction. I can try to give them something new, but I'm not going to give them a cocktail that they think is worth spending $25 on.
Sure. No, that's totally fair. I wanted to get your thoughts on the process. So we've talked about the process of home bartending. We've talked about sort of, the joys of home bartending and some of the considerations. What about the bar itself? Could you now, Alex? Maybe we'll start with Alex here, because I know I have a specific question about Alex's bar, because Alex, your bar is famous. Might be a stretch.
Famous. It's famous.
I would say infamous. Yeah, infamous.
Notorious, infamous.
Yeah, infamous. So can you tell us about the infamous duck bar and how you went around about building the duck bar?
So the duck bar. So the name, there aren't ducks that hang around, although I've invited them many times. I just really like
those are
ducks.
new details.
I know, right? Key. So that's the name, and I don't know. I just kind of thought it'd be kind of fun to have a bit of a theme. So I've got ducks all over the bar and
stuffed.
I used to have some wood ducks. Now I've got fewer. I've still got some, kind of really cool ducks that I got in China, and the whole thing was kind of around the idea of, I want to have all my tools right there. I don't want to have everything ready, and now I just moved, and so I had to deconstruct it. So that's why I did this kind of quote unquote fundraiser for Duck Bar 2, and I basically made punches and liqueurs and everything with all of my booze, which I collected over 2 years, so it was quite a bit. It was quite a party. We got through it all, which was great. And
what did the end of that party look like?
Actually, the end of the party, I was like, I'll be honest, I was fairly sober. I was just like, I'm just going to start cleaning. But I also went to sleep. So
I never make the decision to clean sober.
Yeah, no,
that starts drunk.
But no, it was actually it was cool. And then so now kind of building a bar again, which I think has been such an interesting experience, because I really am building it with with no liquor. The first liquor I got was actually a gift. It was some of these like tiny airport size airline bottles of mezcal. They're beautiful painted bottles. It's kind of cool that that's the first thing in the bar. And I'm gonna build up from there. And so I started with a whiskey and a gin, and I'm kind of going from there. I've got all my bitters. I kept all those, and
Good.
and it's kind of cool because it's a new experience for me to really kind of start from scratch. And I think there are some things that like Velvet Falernum, I'll wait a little longer to put back on the bar. But there are certain things, like getting into aperitifs and all that I'm probably gonna go.
So this is a great time for me to plug something that I'm actually not advertising it, but for friends, I've started consulting on building their home bars, and not by building, like I'm not doing the carpentry work.
Which I could do.
I'm stocking their home bars, and
So we're gonna put Jordan's cell phone number in the show notes.
Only calls late at night.
Right, and the thing is, I'm super cheap. But one thing that, in terms of thinking about building your home bar, the thing that I always say, sort of tongue in cheek, but also very seriously, are first, always put your favorite on the bar first. I mean, there's no point in having a home bar if your favorite's not there. So whether that's whiskey, gin, vodka, rum, whatever, tequila, have that first, and then that's actually second most important. And I only do it in this order because the first most important is if you have a significant other, their favorite is most important. Yep. Because
wise advice.
Because otherwise you're going to be drinking sad instead of drinking happy. But beyond that, again, assuming that it's in the normal realm of common liquors, having a common bottle of so again, maybe your favorite, I'm just going to use myself as an example, maybe your favorite is bourbon or whiskey, and then maybe your second is gin, and so knowing that a lot of people are familiar with white rum drinks over aged rum. A lot of people are also familiar with spiced rum drinks. But having a white rum or even a lightly aged rum, I think is beneficial in knowing how to make a daiquiri. Again, simple process. It's a sour. It's just syrup and fresh fruit juice and the liquor. So having the rum, I'm looking around right now thinking I probably don't have a bottle of vodka in the house, and that's staggering considering all the other bottles I currently have in the house.
Yeah,
but I'm seeing a couple doubles as well.
Yeah, there's a few repeats, but again, I'm not a vodka drinker. I've learned to make one of the best vodka cranberries anybody's ever had.
This side of the Mississippi.
And it's only because I don't want to. If somebody says they want a vodka drink, I don't want to have to think about it. To be honest, like if it's a vodka tonic, sure. Vodka soda, sure. Vodka cranberry. Outside of that, I'm probably not making you a vodka drink. But I feel like that's enough to be a good host and to, if somebody is real. To be honest, I've never run into anybody in my house that I've been serving that I haven't been able to convince to go to gin or whiskey or something else, and that they haven't been perfectly happy with that switch. I'm not saying that I blew them away and that they're now not vodka drinkers, but again, having a baseline, again, you don't need to go buy top shelf liquor for everything. I also keep a lot more citrus around than I ever did before I started hosting cocktail parties, and citrus gets, it becomes a chore, especially when I'm doing research for the podcast, and it's not normally something that I have a ton around unless I'm throwing a party. I buy way more citrus than I used to, because the difference between that and store-bought preservative-filled fruit juice it's a completely different product. It's not the same.
It doesn't taste the same.
It's not the same thing
at all.
And I mean that fresh is superior. And again, it's one of those things where in a certain audience that might sound pretentious or elevated to a degree that is a difficulty that some people might, or not a convenience that some people want to do, but it is super easy. And again, if you're going to go to the effort of hosting and having a home bar, it's worthwhile. Yeah. And then again, if your favorite drink's a martini, sweet vermouth is, I would say both vermouths, sweet and dry vermouth of your favorite. Alex and I disagree to some degree on what our favorites are, and especially on the sweet vermouth side. But I mean, he's wrong too. I only really buy Dolan Dry, and I vary my sweet vermouth depending on the cocktail. But I tend to like Italian sweet vermouths over French, and I like the spicier ones over the more florals and then that sort of thing. But that's learning your palate, and that's developing those things. Yeah. But that orange liqueur, I think. That's something to add. I was gonna say orange liqueur is kind of a go-to. It's in a bunch of classics. You can't make a margarita. You can't make a margarita worth drinking without, in my opinion, Cointreau, but a triple sec in general. Right. And so those are some baselines in terms of thinking about building it out. Once you get there, glassware becomes more important. But I've certainly made a lot of drinks and put them in mismatched glassware for a long time, and people don't think twice about that as long as it tastes good.
Yeah, I think the basic idea, and there's a book out there called The 12 Bottle Bar that I absolutely love, and I think if somebody does come to me and say I'm looking to start up a bar, that's the one I point them to. The basic premise, very simply, is with a few select ingredients, you can basically stock your bar to make hundreds of different drinks. It's all based on your variations. It's all based on if you're adding citrus or if you're adding other ingredients, the kinds of sugars you're using, all that. So that's, I think, a way to kind of think about it in a more limited sense. If you're only going to have 12 bottles total, which is a bigger bar than most people, if you're only going to have that, I mean, you can narrow it down from there too.
Definitely. And so you did an inadvertent plug for another episode in this podcast where in the first 10 episodes that I'm going to be attempting to release all at once here, I'm actually going to do my version of the 12 bottle bar, which is very similar to the published version. A couple of issues that I kind of hash out, and they're not so much issues that I point out, but I sort of give people a choice on some of them, a little cheat workaround based on their flavor preferences. So
absolutely.
I'm not going to get into it here. I'm just going to tease it, but so definitely check out our sort of redux of the 12 bottle bar here on the Modern Bar Cart podcast, but we will link to the actual book in the show notes. So you can always check those out by visiting modernbarcart.com/podcast and searching for this episode. It's right near the beginning. So, so we've talked about a lot of, you guys have given a lot of good advice, a lot of good sort of anecdotes. I'm going to kind of smush a few of the questions together here before we get into the lightning round and just ask, what are some rookie mistakes? What can go wrong when building your bar or hosting a party? I know that we talked about some of the stuff that when it comes to hosting a party, Jordan wants to go back in time and slap himself for not pre-juicing his citrus, for example, or something like that. But what are some of the rookie mistakes that are easily avoidable, or some of the wrong reasons to go about building a bar, the wrong ways to go about it that could simply be fixed if people just knew from folks with experience like yours?
So I would say the number one thing I've seen people do is they try and go too expensive too fast. Jordan and I are both big whiskey drinkers. Whiskey drinkers is how I like to say it. But, people are saying, this $40 bottle is the lowest I'll go. And I'm like, you can get Old Overholt for $17. And that is one of the best mixing whiskeys around. And it's available in every liquor store. They don't advertise, which is probably why it's such a good product, and it's also so inexpensive.
They got a little free advertising from Boardwalk Empire everywhere. I think.
They get free advertising from every.
I'm pretty sure that that's product placement, and that's not free
But they also get free advertising from every bartender at every cocktail bars. That's what they're having. So like, for instance, you want to say, oh yeah, this $40 whiskey. I remember I was talking to someone specifically about that, and I was like, no, like 40 isn't where you want to start. You want to look at like the solid, have on your bar all the time kind of whiskeys. I've got some very old Barton right now, which I love. Very old Barton. And I got a 1.75 liter for $22.
Oh yeah.
Now that is a great stock, mixing whiskey.
Outside of a few exceptions, you can completely stock your bar with every common liquor you're gonna find for $30 or under. That's cocktail.
For sure.
That's cocktail quality liquor. I would say that Scotch might be
some tequila
and some tequila and tequila and mezcal tend to be a little bit pricier, but you can certainly find plenty of whiskey for under $30 and
gin as well.
And gin. And there's also the flip side of going too cheap, and you're kind of going with the. I mean, I don't buy any liquor that's in a plastic bottle.
I actually Ancient Age is my go-to whiskey. I just got so the 750 is in glass, but the handle is in plastic.
Okay.
So I know I'm sort of
there's always exceptions to these rules that we're making.
I got no problem with Ancient Age.
But there's that, and then I would say the other one is that I at least have seen, and I'm sure, and I know I've heard Jordan talk about this, is people that do kind of buy the pre-mixed stuff that's made of poor quality. There are some great pre-mixed syrups and mixtures and all that sort of stuff out there. There's some really good stuff. It's a little bit more expensive, and it's worth it for that. But then you can get your citrus and you can squeeze it like we're talking about. That's a big one. But it's also in terms of adding some of the spices and complexity into some of your drinks. I mean, I've seen pre-mixed Manhattan.
That's the that you're gonna go with the beginner host bartenders not mixing enough spice into their drinks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, what? Are you saying too much?
I just think. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of things that go wrong way before that.
I'm saying like you can buy like a pre-mixed Manhattan mix, which is basically Manhattan's. You can make a decent Manhattan with the right sweet vermouth and the right whiskey. So really, why do you need a separate bottle for the Manhattan when all you're missing out of that is your bitters? So it's like you're so close to it anyway. So that would I say would be some things I really noticed. There's probably a few others. I'm just
and I think what those both boil down to is a lack of knowledge. So I think there's an easy remedy, and that is to if you're listening to this podcast, you've already got the remedy. Right. You're either going to be getting knowledge from me and the guests that I interview, or you're going to quickly abandon ship and just start listening to the Speaking Easy podcast because we're giving you the link, and they've got a lot more episodes than we do. So I think a good plug would be to do both. Listen to some podcasts. If you can download a podcast and listen to it while you're on your way to work, or you can check out a number of the bibliographic references that we have. We always reference books in both of our podcasts. So find the knowledge, and the amount of time that you spend downloading and listening to that podcast, or the amount of money that you spend getting that book online, is going to pay massive dividends down the line, and it's going to save you a lot of time and effort, and at the same time increase the quality of your product.
I'll keep my list short. I will reiterate that pre-juicing, if you're gonna make cocktails with fruit juice, you do not want to be juicing your fruit while you're making the cocktail. I've done it, and I'm already a slow bartender. Ain't that the truth? It doesn't help, and especially because now I've gotten to the point where I tend to strain and then double strain my fruit juice for my cocktails at home.
Sure.
So I strain it once while I'm juicing, and then I strain it again when I'm making the cocktail. So that's probably something super easy. Again, when you're actually hosting, it makes things quicker, it makes things simpler, done. It's operational, it's easy. The other one on that side of things, operational wise, is not enough ice. Or your access to ice is one where I even currently in my setup have to think about how I am both supplying my ice to my bar and also dumping my used ice, because my bar's not set up well where it's convenient to have I don't have a sink nearby, I don't have the refrigerator nearby, so I have to have an ice bucket and I have to have a dump bucket. And so
interesting.
And that's something where now I tend to use like a mixing tin or a shaking tin as my dump bucket, and then when that fills up, I know I can make a run to the sink and dump it out, so I don't have just something huge sitting on my bar. But I do keep an ice bucket nearby, because running back and forth to the freezer to pull ice out, and my freezer also runs a little bit cold, and to be honest, having your ice right at 32 degrees, so it's just starting to melt kind of thing, it makes for a better drink, and that's marginal. That is something very specific, but it's something that I've learned. If you can have your ice resting where it's actually going to be heating up because again, if your freezer is running something lower than 32, you're gonna have frostbit ice, and
especially if you're stirring.
Yep.
But that's the nice thing is that's sort of incidental. That nice little bump in quality that you get from that is just incidental to the fact that you had to start carrying ice from. So yeah, it's nice to be able to. I think this is a good point to just tell folks, like, if you're just starting to build your home bar or bar cart, think about the space too. I mean, we're all constrained by the physical space that we're in and the amount of money that we have to spend. So those are two things that you should, sit down with a piece of paper and make a list of, and what are you dealing with here? If you sit down and map out what you want out of your cocktail bar and how you're going to use it in most situations, whether that's just bartending for yourself and a significant other, or large crowds of people, then some of these things that we're talking about become apparent without us really even having to make the the mention.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things. At a certain point, you have to think about your tools with the drinks that you make. Like, I like martinis, so I really wanted to get a nice mixing glass. A lot of people don't need a $35 Yarai mixing glass from Japan. I apparently needed one, and I love it, and I will never regret it ever. But like, if you don't drink a lot of stirred drinks, if you drink sours, get a nice shaker and stay there. And you can still have something for stirring a drink, but like, just on a functional level, you got to think about that sort of stuff. It's not just the bottles you have in your bar, but the tools also are really important.
So actually, I will.
Are you gonna disagree?
I'll concur.
Thank you.
I'll say that having basic equipment, a shaker, a mixing glass, a pony and jigger, a stirring spoon, a bar spoon, those things are important. You don't need the best out there. You don't need the most expensive out there when you're getting started. It's one of those things where, if this is a hobby that's going to stick around with you then you're going to end up investing in that more expensive equipment, or the equipment that you find adds value or convenience to the experience. I have a shaker that I didn't buy until later. It's OXO brand, and it it's actually like super utilitarian, and it's double layered, and it is the best shaker out there, period. No argument. Like I've got prettier shakers, but that OXO is like my bar mule. It does everything I want it to do, and it does it well, and that sort of thing. So I would just say that is like, you can build into that part of the hobby. You don't need the super fancy stuff to get started, but some of those basic tools are helpful.
Right, and that's another insidious plug for another episode in the top 10, the first 10, and we're going to do a build your bar cart hardware and a build your bar cart software episode. So the software being like the computer model is the software is the liquid components and the hardware is the tools. So the OXO or OXO or however you pronounce it, I have actually, instead of a pony and jigger, I have a little stainless steel measuring cup, and it's a two and a half ounce measuring cup, and it's not sexy. It's not as sexy as the stuff that they have at the fancy cocktail bars.
Their stuff is utilitarian, but it is
because it's got a pour spout, and I spill way less liquor because it has a pour spout,
which adds up.
So it's a phenomenal little piece of equipment. So when I record that episode, I will definitely have to do a shout out to your double walled shaker as an option. So thank you for mentioning that. Right now, I want to get into some lightning round questions. We've had a lot of really good anecdotes and just general advice from two really knowledgeable guys here, and I really appreciate you doing that. But I want to give folks a little bit of your personality so that hopefully after they're done listening to this episode, they go onto whatever podcasting app they're using or on iTunes or wherever it is and download some of your episodes. So a little bit of personality here just to give them a little bit more of the speaking easy flavor. So the first question in the lightning round is...
Can we call it the white lightning round?
All right, we can call it the white lightning round.
Excellent. I was just thinking about that all day.
Moonshine reference.
All right,
we'll call it the grease lightning round.
Grease lightning.
that's all right.
Okay, right.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't want to throw off your flow. I just really wanted to get that out. I just, that's my personality. There you go.
There it is.
All right.
Interrupting.
Banter. So, first question: what is your favorite cocktail? And if you don't have a favorite cocktail of all time, what is a cocktail you've been particularly obsessed with recently, and why?
Vucare, hands down, my favorite cocktail all time.
I love it.
Equal parts cognac, rye, and sweet vermouth. Dash or two of Benedictine, some bitters, Pouchauds and Angostura, and brandy. I don't do the Luxardo cherry. I do a brandy cherry, but that's actually a big Alex influence on my life. Is the brandy cherry over the Luxardo.
I do make those.
Recipes available on speakeasypodcast.com.
Yep. Definitely, yeah. Mine is the Sazerac, which quite simply is an old fashioned in a glass that's been rinsed with absinthe. The complexity can't be beat. The flavors can't be, really reciprocated by anything else. It's so beautiful and simple, and that's my favorite drink by far.
So noteworthy here, I don't know if you guys coordinated, but 2 New Orleans drinks.
Yeah. That's kind of, they invented a lot of really good drinks.
We have, for the most part, we have very similar liquor and cocktail profiles.
I think I like gin more than you, but other than that, we're pretty
compatible.
You like rum? Actually, that's it. I like gin more than him. He likes rum more than me. I think that's I hope that's fair.
For expediency, I'm not going to disagree.
This is the lightning round.
The white lightning round.
So you just answered question number 2, which is what is your favorite spirit? Any elaboration on gin or whiskey or bourbon? I don't know if it's bourbon.
So I would say that cocktail wise, I still think rye is my favorite, but I'd say overall bourbon, and I sip it. I think overall bourbon still wins, and it's not in a cocktail.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that rye for cocktails, and then for just sipping whiskey, I go rye or scotch. It's a tie.
Okay.
But then gin is definitely the next 10.
And any favorite brands, Jordan?
Favorite brands of bourbon, anything Four Roses. Again, I use their yellow label, which is actually, again, a common theme you'll hear on our podcast is that I like 100 proof stuff or higher. But for cocktails, especially when I'm serving other folks, Four Roses yellow label is great, and it's 80 proof. But I love small batch and their single barrel. I think they're all great values. Booker, Russell Reserve from Wild Turkey. When you get to the higher end stuff, Willet puts out so much limited release stuff that I can't point you to a specific bottle, but anything Family Estate, it's gonna be pricey, but is, I think, well worth it. And for any listener out there who is a whiskey drinker, if you can find W.L. Weller 12 year, not the Special Reserve, and arguably the Antique 107 is good too, but if you find W.L. Weller 12 year for market price, which is about $30, buy all of it, and I will pay you double for it, and I'll still get the better deal. But I'd say that those are, I mean, Elijah Craig Barrel Proof is a great. I mean, it's high proof. It's like 100. It depends on the barrel, but 127, 135, 120, whatever. I love that stuff. So all over the map with the different brands that are out there serving stuff. Those are my go-tos.
What about for gins, Alex?
Yeah. So for gins, I think my number one is Blue Coat.
Out of Philly.
Yeah. And it's good to see American gin really on the rise. I mean, there are any number of other gins I love, but honestly, like one of my favorite gin cocktails is just the lowly and simple gin Ricky, and my favorite for that is Beefeater. And everyone's had Beefeater. You've seen it everywhere. It's got a lot of juniper flavors, London Dry, and that's another one. Again, those are not expensive bottles. So
right.
Those are in gin, and then also there's a local one, Green Hat, from New Columbia Distilleries. Their Navy strength is great, and then their summer has a lot of citrus in it, and that's also really great.
Yep, definitely agree on that. Very, very good recommendations. My favorite question: if you could have a cocktail with anyone in the world, past or present, who would that person be? Where would you go? What cocktail would you order or create? So this could be at a restaurant or sort of at your home bar or a hypothetical home bar where you have amazing supplies. Paint us a picture.
All right. I'd say I've got two answers. One is I'm a big fan of American history, big presidential biography reader, and George Washington, for a very brief moment, had the largest whiskey distillation operation in the United States. Probably less than a year, quantity-wise, but he did have it for a while. And his likeness to Cato, the self-discipline, that sort of thing, and his outlook on America's future are ones that whether they've been romanticized or not, are ones that I've attached to. And the fact that he was a whiskey distiller as well, and his wife was a huge fan of punch. I just feel like there'd be a lot of overlap there where we could have a great conversation that had neither to do with politics nor drinking, but I feel like we would find similarities, and I'd love to have been a contemporary there. The other one would be I like drinking more often than not in bars that don't exist in DC, and those are neighborhood bars. Those are hole in the wall places that I think, because of the way that zoning laws work here, you have bar neighborhoods and you have residential neighborhoods, and you do not have a lot of quintessentially neighborhood bars. And I've met some great, even if they're momentary friends, in neighborhood bars in Chicago and elsewhere, and anybody who's willing to have a shot and a beer or an old fashioned in that setting and talk to a complete stranger is somebody who will quickly become a friend of mine.
So George Washington in a neighborhood bar.
Yeah, I was thinking of those as two separate things, but just about anybody in a neighborhood bar that's willing to drink simply and kind of in my line of blue collar drinks, but then George Washington, and again, I'm probably drinking a punch with him.
I love the Martha Washington punch call. That's fascinating. That's great.
Oh yeah. So wow, those are really good great answers. I was, earlier I was joking that my answer was going to be Abe Lincoln drinking Vanique on the moon. But I don't think that would really happen. I've also got two. So I think the first one is, I love Ernest Hemingway, and I think that a lot of people who are prone to spirits imbibing are partial to him. So I would love to be like down in Key West at Sloppy Joe's, where he was pretty well known. Like after a day of fishing, going just being manly men and going just to have some rum and hang out and then end the night with his favorite drink was actually a martini. A lot of people don't know that, but he wrote about it. But so end the night with a martini, and then he'd go off and be Ernest Hemingway, and I'd go to sleep around 10:30 or so.
There's a really great story where he just absolutely destroyed like in a physical altercation one of my favorite poets, Wallace Stevens, who was also a frequenter of Key West.
There you go.
Wallace Stevens thought he was going to step to Ernest Hemingway, and Ernest Hemingway just punched him out into a puddle.
Hopefully it's not on one of those nights. The other one would be more to see a bartender. Professor Jerry Thomas, the guy who kind of wrote the first cocktail book, and is a legend. And I would love to go see during the gold rush. He was actually in California. He was in San Francisco, across the bay from San Francisco. I think the town is called Martinez, which in the bar is El Dorado, where he invented the Martinez, which a lot of people think may have been the first martini. But then he also had this drink that he was well known for at the time at the El Dorado called the Blue Blazer, which is just the honey. I think it's just honey, lemon, and scotch. But he would stretch it between two mugs while it was on fire and make a blue flame. And obviously you see people do that now, but to see the original do it, that would be pretty cool. So
absolutely, those are awesome answers. You guys did not disappoint on that one. Now, we spoke earlier about a few maybe texts that you have found useful, the 12 Bottle Bar being one of them. Mm-hmm. Are there any other cocktail books that you would recommend, particularly since we're early on in the podcast here, for people who are just starting out?
Really quickly, two recommendations. I really like The Joy of Mixology as a general cocktail recipe book. It's over your other shoulder. And then for operations and for procedure, Liquid Intelligence. Gary Reagan and Dave Arnold. So Gary Reagan's the author of The Joy of Mixology. Dave Arnold is the author of Liquid Intelligence. And again, Joy of Mixology is just a great kind of encyclopedia of drink recipes, well organized so that you can search them by different things, whether it's ingredient or style of drink. And then again, Liquid Intelligence for really honing in on the skill set, the simple things that you think you know how to shake, but maybe you don't, and you think you know how to mix, but maybe you don't. And simple steps to make your ice better, simple steps to make serves better, all that stuff.
Great. Yeah. So that's sort of the book where you learn all the hacks to take it to the next level.
Yep.
So the two additional that I would talk about would be anything and everything that Dave Wondrich has ever written. He's ever written, looked at, thought about, or even been around.
Hey Dave, come on our show.
Yeah, we would love that. But he also, he's mostly well known for the Imbibe, which it's a great. I love cocktail history, and so that's a great book for that. And he's got some nice recipes in there.
And just so everybody knows, I was in the same room with Dave Wondrich, and he made a cocktail. It was actually a punch based on a book that he had recently published on punch, and he put a product called ambergris in this punch, and it is sort of fermented petrified whale bile. So
that sounds like Dave Wondrich.
That also sounds like Alex Luboff.
So if you want to get kind of weird, and he also has a fantastic sense of humor. Oh, yeah. And he will definitely be referenced quite a bit throughout this the Modern Bar Cart podcast. So what was the other one that you were going to recommend?
The other one is called Vintage Spirits and Forgotten Cocktails by Dr. Cocktail, Ted Haig. Yeah, I mean, it's a great book. It's got all these sorts of obscure, a lot of pre-prohibition cocktails. Ones that just, had kind of fallen by the wayside, or certain ingredients had kind of disappeared. There are a lot of drinks in there that feature peach brandy, which actually sadly is not made in the United States anymore. That sort of stuff. So, that book, I use that more than almost any of my other books.
Gotcha. That's good, and I think that's what we're looking for here. We're really trying to get those recommendations of the ones that people come back to again and again. For me, it's Amy Stewart's The Drunken Botanist, and that's because I'm making bitters.
Yeah. Which I'm surprised you and I didn't get into like just a long bitters rant together, because that's what we're known for. Right?
Yeah. Well,
time for a future episode.
Exactly. Yeah. There will be more on that, folks. I assure you.
Yeah.
There will be bitters.
I might be gone during that one.
So fellas, first of all, I want to ask how people can best connect with you. And I know that's something that you always work into your own podcast, but there's another thing that you also always work into your own podcast roughly at this time of the podcast. So as you are tag teaming the best way to connect with you, maybe you can give us a little taste of that.
Okay. Well, I think we'll start with some of how to get in touch with us.
That's probably a good idea.
So on Twitter, you can find us at Speaking Easy Pod. On Instagram, at Speaking Easy Podcast. You can search for us on Facebook, Speaking Easy Podcast. We also have a website, don't we, Jordan?
We have a website, which is speakingeasypodcast.com. And if you're listening to us on iTunes, you can go to speakingeasypodcast.com/review. And we've made it about as easy as possible there. And then I think what you're referencing is the fact that we always end our show with a toast.
Well, where I come up with a toast, and Jordan uses the same old toast.
I use the same great toast every time.
Well,
I like where you've kind of gone with it, though, because I remember early on it was just sort of you said the toast, but then you worked in pretty soon afterwards this sort of the inverse of it.
Right. Yeah. No.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Mostly to appease me.
And the thing about that is that's where my limited creativity actually comes into play, because I usually don't know what I'm going to say on that side of things until right before.
Yeah.
Well,
and so I usually start, and so I will start again, and so because I mentioned Hemingway, I have a Hemingway
beautiful
toast. It's not really a toast; it's more of just a statement from him, but it's a great drinking statement, which I use as a toast. Raising your glasses. Always do sober what you said you'd do drunk. That will teach you to keep your mouth shut. So,
cheers. Clink.
That seems like a toast. Enough.
Well, speaking for the Speaking Easy podcast, we're certainly not here to make your white lightning round quick, but we are here to help you be a better drinker. So to being a better drinker.
Being a better drinker. Yeah. Cheers, gentlemen. Well, thanks for coming on the episode. And everybody, I do want to emphasize, once you're done listening to this, head over to Speaking Easy Podcast, however you want to do that, whether that's through your podcasting app or simply on the interwebs. I know for a fact that you can play their episodes right there in your web browser, which is what I would do at work when I wanted it to seem like I was listening to something work related and not to my iPhone. So
now it is work related for you.
And now, thankfully, here I am. So if you too want cocktail podcasting to be, no, I'm just kidding. But thank you for tuning in, and I will see you next time.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening. I just want to remind you that this episode might be over, but the journey and the discussion are just beginning. If you're excited about the content in this or any other episode, please tell us. Follow us on Instagram at Modern Bar Cart for recipes and great product tips, or stalk me personally at Quixologist. That's QUIX-ologist. You can also like us on Facebook by searching Modern Bar Cart, or hit us up directly via email by sending a note to podcast@modernbarcart.com. That email address, by the way, is also the one that you should use if you've got any cocktail or home bartending related questions you'd like us to address, or if you think you have a unique perspective on the cocktail world and would like to be interviewed for all to hear. I'll see you next time, but until then, drink responsibly and experiment boldly.